Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, 2020 dominated by a generation-defining pandemic, crushing economies and catching world leaders by surprise, as well as a highly contentious U.S. presidential election, which continues to divide the nation. Veteran journalist and Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace looks back on a tumultuous year and how it compares to other challenging times in modern American history. Congress inching closer to hammering out a COVID-19 relief deal expected to include a second round of stimulus checks for struggling Americans. New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority Chairman Pat Foye discusses America's public transportation crisis and whether he thinks taxpayers should be bailing out big city transit systems. Plus commentary from former White House speechwriter and Fox News contributor Mark Thiessen. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Geraldo Rivera.
I'm Emily Campagno.
And I'm Eric Shawn. This is a Fox News Rundown.
Friday, December 18th, 2020. I'm Chris Foster. As we look back at 2020, Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace says about President Trump and politics in 2021.
He's going to be a major topic of conversation, a major focus of our attention, and it'll be interesting to see whether he's able to maintain that platform and maintain that spotlight when he's no longer the president.
I'm Lisa Brady. As more COVID relief gets closer in Washington, the nation's largest public transit agency is appealing for federal help.
Subways, buses, Metro-North, Long Island Railroad, bridges, and tunnels were essential workers before the pandemic, and everybody knows it now.
And I'm Mark Thiessen. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Feels like we're in a bit of an in-between time in America right now. President Trump has 33 days left in office before President-elect Biden is sworn in. The coronavirus pandemic is worse than ever, more people getting sick and dying, but vaccines are finally getting to people, with 20 million Americans expected to get shots by the end of this year. We've been speaking with Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace pretty much every week on this show. A historic presidential election and a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic in the same year means we've had a lot to talk about in 2020. We thought this would be a good time to look back at what we've been through this year. Chris says there's really only one year he could compare it to.
1968, this reminds me, that was just a terrible year. The Vietnam War was in full roar at that point. We had two terrible assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Bobby Kennedy. Tremendous disruption in our politics. Lyndon Johnson decided not to seek re-election. There were race riots in the streets, frankly, much worse race riots in the sense that cities, after the assassination of King, really started to burn, big sections of cities. The one thing we didn't have then that we had this year was, a huge health pandemic. But the only year in my life that sort of compares in the sense that you wondered, is the country going to hold? Is the center going to hold? Was 68. Other than that, 2020 is one for the history books, and not in a good way.
President Trump brought out a lot of political engagement from his supporters and from his detractors. It was the highest voter turnout by percentage of eligible voters since 1900, when women couldn't even vote yet. It was like 60, like 2/3 or something like that of eligible voters voted. Do you think any of that engagement sticks, or is that unique to this man?
I think it's pretty unique to this man. I certainly don't think, the vast majority of the people that were voting for Joe Biden were out there waiting online for hours to vote for Joe Biden. I mean, you could see it in the exit polls. An awful lot of them were voting against Donald Trump. And obviously, the 75 million people who voted for Donald Trump, I don't think many of them were voting against Joe Biden. They were voting for Trump. So well over 100 million people were voting either for or against Donald Trump. I'm not sure that anybody can excite that kind of passion, both for and against. And, I think I have to say, I'm not sure it's necessarily a good thing. I understand there are a lot of people listening who like Donald Trump, but I kind of long for the days when, we have a kind of more normal relationship with a president, which is that he's not in our face all the time. He's not on our minds all the time. He occupies a place in our consciousness and in our discussion, but he isn't the only topic of discussion, and that's what for good or ill, and there was some of both with Donald Trump. It seemed like that it was been not only for the last 4 years with the presidency, but maybe for the 2 years before that when he was running for president.
I mean, he certainly got what he wanted in that if somebody walked up to you and said, "Oh my God, did you hear what he did today?" you would probably immediately know who they were talking about. Where that's not going to be the case. Where that's not going to be the case with Joe Biden.
No, it's not. And some people are going to be bored, and some people are going to be relieved. The really interesting question to me is how much will Donald Trump continue to dominate the conversation? Because it's clear he's not going away. And I believe these stories that whether it's between now and Inauguration Day or on January 20th or maybe shortly thereafter, he's going to give every impression, if not say out loud, I'm running for re-election in 2024. So he's going to be a major topic of conversation, a major focus of our attention, and it'll be interesting to see whether he's able to maintain that platform and maintain that spotlight when he's no longer the president, when he's a defeated candidate for re-election. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know. I think for a while, he's just such an attraction to the media that, we'll continue to cover him. And so that gives him a certain amount of oxygen right there. But you just wonder how long he can keep that going when he's not the president anymore. I don't have a good answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, he's raised more than $200 million for his political action committee since Election Day.
It's astonishing. There's no question about the hold that he has on millions of people in this country, roughly half the country, is I've never seen anything like it. And I've seen some pretty popular politicians, whether it was Jack Kennedy or Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama, but I've never seen anybody who had this kind of devotion and this kind of just almost tribal allegiance. Our politics is different, our media is different. That all contributes to it. But Donald Trump was able to make the entire conversation, pro or con, about him for an astonishing period of time. We consume news and we consume stories and trends with remarkable speed. And just to give an example, Tom Cruise going postal on the people on his film set. That'll be forgotten in a few days. Donald Trump is not going to be forgotten in a few days. People are going to love him or hate him, but they're not going to forget him.
Speaking of coronavirus and Tom Cruise going mental, those people, we've talked a lot about the politics of this over the past few months, the masks, the shutdowns, and you've said to me many, many times you can't spin the virus, but a lot of people are still trying to. Maybe not politicians so much, but I still hear a lot of people saying that it's fear-mongering and it's fake news.
On Wednesday of this week, 3,600 people died. Somebody did the math. I don't blame me if it's wrong. That's something like 2 people a minute for every minute of a day. 3,600 people died in this country. Now, in fact, we're getting much better at treating the disease. The mortality rate, the percentage of people who get COVID who then die, is much lower than it was in April when we didn't know about remdesivir and steroids and all kinds of stuff. But when you've got 200,000 cases a day versus 35 or 40,000 cases a day, then even if the percentage is lower, the total number is going to be much bigger. Now, I understand the frustration for people, who have been through these lockdowns, and, you wonder about the science in some cases. But, they're just, when 200,000 people are getting it every day, and I'm not saying everything, you got to follow the science. It now appears schools may be safer, and it may be safer for kids to be in school than to be out in the regular world. And, I don't hold the scientists wrong for finding new facts and responding to those new facts. That's what you hope they'll do. But the idea that any kind of lockdown, I'm not saying every lockdown is legit, but to sort of dismiss any kind of lockdown and say this is fake news, tell that to the families of those 3,600 people who died.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's certainly the science of what and when and where gets locked down is certainly debatable. I just meant the debate over the seriousness of this. Now, I know you canceled your Thanksgiving plans. We talked about that then. Dr. Anthony Fauci on the White House task force says he's not going to see his kids over Christmas either. You guys going to lie low for this one too, or figure out a way to do something, or just wait, the vaccines are coming?
Well, we're going to certainly lie lower. I'm hoping to see, I've got one son who's got 3 kids, so 3 grandkids that I've not seen since February, since before, the March lockdown. They're up in New York, and we're literally talking about meeting. They're up in New York. We're in Washington, meeting in Philadelphia, going to an outdoor park, so it's not as long a drive for either, and spending a couple of hours outside, and it's going to warm up a little bit on the East Coast next week, and with masks and social distance, it's tough. You're too young to have grandchildren, but you miss this terribly. And as you get older, you wonder how many years, not to get morbid, you have left, and so you're really sad to not see them. So I want to go the extra mile, or in this case, probably 150 miles, to go see them. But is it going to be a normal Christmas? Absolutely not. And in that sense, I'm patient. My feeling is we've come so far. We've given up so many things to stay safe. And why blow it and act recklessly when you're so close to being able to get a vaccine? All this year, I've been saying to people whenever they say, "Well, I think we'll be okay by the summer or Labor Day or Election Day," I always say, "I'll take the over. I think it's going to be longer than that." But I'm now of a belief with the vaccine, maybe by this Memorial Day 2021. Things will be back to normal. And, it's a long time to wait, but it's not too long.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right to me. And something you said a week or two ago, that these polls about people not wanting to take the vaccine, they're already changing. And I think that people are going to agree they're going to start running to the light at the end of that tunnel.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I can understand people being a little wary now and wanting to wait and see. But, if a month from now or 2 months from now, that whole first group, which will be millions, have gotten vaccinated and they're immune from the disease, they have the right antibodies, and there haven't been any severe reactions. Yes, there have been a couple of allergic, but nothing that an EpiPen couldn't solve. Then I think you're going to see most people say, "Wow, I'm signing up."
Chris Wallace, I appreciate it. Merry Christmas if we don't talk before then. Host of Fox News Sunday, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Same to you. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year to you, all the listeners out there.
This is Mark Thiessen with your Fox News commentary coming up.
After a months-long stalemate, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says a deal on COVID relief appears to be close at hand.
We're going to stay right here, until we're finished, even if that means working through the weekend, which is highly likely.
And the optimism is bipartisan, even as the two sides continue to blame each other for taking so long. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says it should be a larger bill.
But we're all eager to conclude our work and deliver the relief that the American people have been waiting for. Everyone wants to see this get done, and soon.
In Congress, though, it's not over till it's over, and COVID relief ended up running parallel to talks on the larger spending bill that's needed to avoid a government shutdown. In addition, while sticking points are now separated from areas of basic agreement, not everyone is on board with those basics. Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul isn't a fan of stimulus checks for everyone.
What could be dumber as an idea to print up money we don't have, or borrow it from foreign countries, or borrow it from whoever we have to borrow it from, and give it to people who are still working? It's a really bad idea.
He's also critical of adding extra money to unemployment checks. Both sides seem to agree more help is needed for small businesses, but it's not clear yet whether one of the hard-hit areas we don't hear as much about, public transit, would get more help this time. That was part of the epic lifeline passed in March, the CARES Act. Now, the largest public transit authority in the country says without more federal help, severe cuts, including thousands of layoffs, are coming. On an average weekday, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority would normally carry over 11 million passengers on New York City area trains, buses, and subways, with more than 800,000 vehicles using its bridges and tunnels. But as with the airlines, most of the passengers they had before the shutdowns have not yet come back, and they get about 50% of their revenue from customer fares and tolls.
The decline in ridership on subways and buses and Metro North and Long Island Railroad is orders of magnitude worse than the Great Depression.
Pat Foye is the MTA chairman.
If you measure from September 1929, which was the month before the stock market crash, to 1933, which was the bottom in terms of subway ridership, and obviously ridership was less then because there were fewer people living in the city, but ridership on subways over that time period decreased 13%. That was the biggest decline. At the depths of the pandemic in March and April, subway ridership was down 95%. Wow. And right now, subway ridership on the subways is down 70 to 75% depending on the day. In January for this year, the MTA expected a surplus of about $80 million. We had a $51.5 billion capital plan, largest by far in the history of the MTA. 30% of the revenue for that, 30% of the funding for that would have come from congestion pricing. On-time performance on the subways had increased month after month after month, I think for 9 or 10 months in a row. Record ridership or near record ridership on subways, Long Island Railroad, and Metro North. And then obviously in March, the whole world changed.
Yeah. I mean, the good numbers that you had in January, is that a reflection of the decades-long effort around the country, really, to get more people to use public transportation? Was that a function of that paying off?
So New York is unique. The city kind of grew up and developed around the mass transit system. We carry about 40% of the mass transit riders in the country. We're far and away, the largest in North America. And it's been part of the culture and the development patterns and the economics of life in New York for, over 100 years.
Yeah, the pandemic has made a lot of people think about what's actually essential as well. And mass transit and mass transit workers are essential. Have you noticed a change in public perception? Do you get more positive feedback now?
We do. And first of all, your statement is absolutely right. I mean, transit workers, subways, buses, Metro North, Long Island Railroad, bridges and tunnels were essential workers before the pandemic, and everybody knows it now. We poll our customers, and from things like 70% of our customers have never seen subway stations and subway cars as clean as they are now. The regard in which transit workers are held is never been higher, and that's well deserved. And transit workers, literally kept the city and the region moving, during the entire pandemic.
How hard is it to get passengers to follow the safety rules? How are employers coping with that added stress? Employees, I should say.
As a result of an executive order issued by Governor Cuomo, it is the law of the state of New York that to ride on mass transit, you've got to have a mask. A mask is the single most important thing everybody can do to protect themselves and their fellow commuters and our employees. Our employees' mask compliance is as close as you can get to 100%. We survey regularly our customers. In the last survey that we did, bus mask compliance was very close to 100%. Subway compliance was about 96%. We've been relentlessly marketing and messaging that, masks are the order of the day. It's the law, but it's also the right thing to do. And our customers have done that. I ride the Long Island Railroad and the subway every day. And in addition to the data, my anecdotal experience and that of my colleagues at the MTA and friends and family who ride, you rarely see a customer on a subway car or Long Island Railroad or Metro North who doesn't have a mask on. And that's really important and a credit to the work that New Yorkers have done, collectively to stop the spread of the virus.
How much federal aid are you hoping for? I know that some federal aid is assumed in the budget proposal that was just recently passed. Are you hoping for more than that or just that amount? Where does the hole in the budget stand?
In April, the CARES Act passed, and that had $3.9 billion for the MTA. Because of the precipitous decline in our revenues caused by the pandemic, we exhausted the last of that funding July 24th, literally 3 months later. Our ask of the federal government now is a total of $12 billion. That's over a period of years, which would include 21, 22, 23, and 24. We're encouraged by the fact that there are serious and late-stage negotiations going on in Washington with respect to a lame duck session COVID relief bill, which would include $15 billion or north of that for transit around the country, and approximately $4.5 billion for the MTA to get us through 2021. The budget that you're quite right that our board unanimously passed assumes that in this lame duck session or early next year, we'll get on the order of $4.5 billion. That will cover the deficit in 2021. And if that happy event were to happen, we would not be forced to reduce service dramatically on subways, buses, and Metro North and the commuter rails, up to 50% on the commuter rails, up to 40% on subways and buses, and lay off thousands of our colleagues. But that funding will get us through only 2021.
What would you say to someone in any other part of the country who might think, why should I care about a big city's mass transit issues and budget problems, and why should my tax dollars be spent on it?
One is the MTA's capital plan literally touches every state in the union. So let's go to the middle of the country, pick Nebraska. In Nebraska, subway cars are built by Kawasaki. Actually, in Lincoln, Nebraska, there are 2,000 Nebraskans working on that. So subway cars for New York City Transit and cars for Long Island Railroad and Metro North. The $51.5 billion capital plan that I mentioned literally touches nearly every state, directly or indirectly, including Georgia and Florida and Texas, New York State, of course. But Pennsylvania, we've got a vendor in Georgia called FleetCor. There's a company called Alstom, which operates in upstate New York, and so literally every part of the nation is touched. Point one. Point two, since New York contributes about 10% of national GDP, a little lower than that, what goes on in New York's economy matters to everybody in the country. And the economy in New York is really reliant on a healthy mass transit system. The third thing is that New York is a donor state to the federal government. Its taxpayers contribute more than the state gets back, and we're on that basis have the not distinction, but have the burden of contributing more to the federal government than any other state. So the deficit is larger than that of any other state. And there are states around the union that, from a donor point of view, are positive. They get more from the federal government than is contributed. Obviously, New York's ability to do that would be significantly impaired if the economy were impaired because of a struggling MTA.
Certainly a lot to think about, and a big weight on your shoulders, to say the least. MTA Chairman Pat Foye, thank you very much for your time.
Lisa, thank you very much.
It's the Perino and Steyerwalt I'll Tell You What podcast. Dana Perino of The Five and Fox News political editor Chris Steyerwalt dissect the ins and outs of national politics. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Mark Thiessen.
What's on your mind?
Joe Biden promised in his victory speech to unite us here at home and told Trump supporters that he wanted to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, and see each other again. Well, there's one simple way he could show he's serious. Give President Trump credit for the stunning success of Operation Warp Speed. On Monday, the first Americans were vaccinated against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This is the greatest public health achievement in history. Until now, the record for the fastest vaccine development was 4 years. Operation Warp Speed did it in 9 months. Critics mocked President Trump when he pledged a vaccine by the end of the year. After the president announced in May a Manhattan Project-style effort to develop, manufacture, and distribute, quote, a proven coronavirus, hopefully by the end of the year, unquote, MSNBC's Brian Williams interviewed one expert who assured him that the timeline was, quote, preposterous, unquote, and that Trump was, quote, POTUS in Wonderland, unquote. While an NBC News fact check declared, quote, experts say that the development, testing, and production of a vaccine for the public is still at least 12 to 18 months off, and that anything less would be a medical miracle, unquote. Well, we got our miracle. How? The genius of Operation Warp Speed was the decision to run the vaccine development process in parallel rather than sequentially. The Trump administration invested about $10 billion in 8 vaccine candidates, purchasing hundreds of millions of doses of vaccines before they were proven, clearing away regulatory hurdles, and putting a 4-star general, Gustav Perna, in charge of logistics and distribution. The administration pledged $1.95 billion for the purchase and nationwide distribution of 100 million doses of Pfizer's vaccine, which began this week. It also provided $955 million to support the development of Moderna's vaccine, and another $1.5 billion to support large-scale manufacturing and distribution of the vaccine. It also pledged to purchase 100 million vaccine doses each from AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax, all of which are in final phase 3 clinical trial. This strategy was not without risks. The government provided about $2 billion to Sanofi and GlaxoSmithKline for 100 million doses of their vaccine, which recently suffered setbacks. But because the administration spent billions to buy vaccines before the clinical trials were over, it is now able to distribute upward of 500 million doses of vaccine over the coming months, first to the most vulnerable Americans and eventually to all of us. As Dr. Monsef Slaoui, the chief science advisor at Operation Warp Speed, explained to me in an interview, quote, between the first quarter and the second quarter of 2021, the most at-risk populations will, I hope, have been immunized. This, he said, quote, should decrease dramatically the burden of this disease on society in general, because most of the burden of the disease is on high-risk population. By next summer, he said, the worst of the pandemic should be over. Nothing like this has ever happened in the history of modern medicine. So why has Joe Biden refused to acknowledge it? On Monday night, in a speech hailing his Electoral College victory, he ended by noting that we had just passed the grim milestone of 300,000 COVID deaths. But he said nothing about the historic vaccinations that were administered that same day. It was like ignoring the moon landing. Biden has criticized Trump's pandemic response failures, so why not give the president credit for this unadulterated success? Simple, because that would mean acknowledging that for all Trump's flaws in managing the pandemic, he is also responsible for ending it, and Biden is saving that credit for himself. Perhaps given Trump's terrible behavior since the election, Biden is in no mood to praise the president. But it's not about Trump. It's about Biden delivering on his promise to reach out to his opponent's supporters and bring Americans together. If he truly wants to unite the country, he should give credit where credit is due and pledge to continue Operation Warp Speed. I'm Mark Thiessen.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. New from the Fox News Podcasts Network.
My name is Kennedy, and welcome to my podcast, which will, I humbly say, single-handedly save the world. You're welcome.
It's Kennedy Saves the World. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.